Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just going to wait maybe 30 seconds for folks to join and roll in here. Okay, folks are joining. Hello, hello, welcome. Okay, it looks like we have a good number on, so I think we'll go ahead and kick things off. So again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today, we are super excited to reveal the results of a recently published total economic impact study that was conducted by Forrester Consulting. Poppulo commissioned this study for our employee communications platform. And really, whether you're building a business case to invest in Poppulo, if you're exploring the world of internal communications technology, even if you're an existing Poppulo customer, there's something in this webinar for everyone. And we really want it to be interactive. So if you have questions throughout, please, engage with us there. Today, you'll learn about the cost savings and business benefits that real customers have achieved with Poppulo, as well as how to frame the value of technology investments to your leadership. And as always, the session is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar, as well as a copy, your own copy of the Forrester study to really dive a little bit deeper into the results. My name is Heather Bicknell, and I am a product marketing director at Poppulo. As part of this role, I spend time speaking with customers and with analyst groups like Forrester about how personalized and data-driven communications help drive greater organizational impact. And I've been working with Forrester Consulting and our Poppulo customers to create this study. So my hope is that it really serves as a useful tool for you along wherever you are in your buying journey. We do apologize, but unfortunately, our original guest speaker had to drop out of this session due to some unforeseen circumstances. So instead, I wanted to make sure we still had, the voice of the customer in here. So I brought in the amazing Christy Alexander, our Director of Strategy and Value at Poppulo, who has many of these similar types of conversations with our customers. So she'll have lots of great anecdotes to share and bring in that lens as well. So Christy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Heather, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm excited to be here, and as Heather said, I work directly with our customers to help them formulate business cases and strategic communication plans. So I'm excited to be able to share some of my experiences with all of you.
And thank you for hopping on last minute with me, Christy. This could be great. So just quickly, for those who might not be familiar with Poppulo, you probably know a little bit about us if you've shown up to this webinar. But for a quick overview, we help leading global organizations deliver transformative communications experiences that really reach, engage, and help inspire all of their employees, whether frontline or desk-based. And that amounts to more than 50 million employees reached globally across the more than 4,500 organizations that we work with. And with the Poppulo platform, communicators are able to publish and measure targeted, personalized content across channels. And our multi-channel offering includes email, digital signage, a mobile app, integrations with Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and more, all backed by enterprise-grade performance, scale, and security in some of the organizations we work with are on the screen there. So our agenda for today. So first, we'll talk a little bit about what a Forrester Total Economic Impact study, or TEI for short, what it really is, what the process looks like, Forrester's proven methodology for creating these studies. Then we'll look at some of the key findings, including the quantified, so those hard kind of number benefits, as well as the unquantified benefits, things that aren't as measurable but are still really important to the overall value of a platform like Poppulo, as well as the ROI customers have achieved with Poppulo. Then we'll share some practical ways that you can actually adapt these insights from the study to build your own business case. And finally, we'll have some time at the end for live Q&A. So you should see two interactive areas at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you could use the Q&A function for any questions, that just helps us on the back end have a clear view of what's coming in as a question. So anything you want to ask me or Christy along the way, please do drop them there, and we will do our best to ensure no questions are missed. And you're also welcome to use the chat if you'd like to interact with your fellow audience members during the session. Okay, so let's get into it. What is a total economic impact study methodology? So TEI is a proven process created by Forrester Consulting, and it's used to demonstrate the value of a technology investment. So it really goes beyond the traditional total cost of ownership or ROI calculations by weighing some additional factors that make it a more holistic and conservative analysis. So just going through some of the key components here. There are benefits factored in, of course. So this is the added revenue or business benefits achieved as a result of the investment. Costs include both the upfront and going costs of adoption. Flexibility is the strategic value that can be obtained on top of the initial investment. So this one's a little bit nuanced, but you can think of it as your ability to mature your program and add use cases without growing the software. So really things that you're able to do that weren't possible prior to your investment. And then risks are where Forrester accounts for uncertainties. So things that might vary across organizational approach or even the people within your organization, how they react to things. So really factoring in risk to make that more conservative economic calculation there. And, if you've shown up today, you're probably like, there's a reason, you need this information, right? You kind of probably understand the why, but just to put a little bit of color there, we know that it's not always easy when you're making a business case for software investment to your organization, especially now. I was just looking back at the latest Gallagher State of the Sector report, which, if you're not familiar, that covers trends in internal communications. And more than a third of communications professionals are still citing lack of budget as a high impact barrier to their programs. So, even though internal comms teams still lead the charge to advocate for additional budget and technology, of course, there are other stakeholders that you need to convince along the way, folks in IT and in the C-suite, in your finance and procurement teams. And this is where using something like the TEI can be really helpful. Forrester is really well known for producing these reports. They've been doing them for decades. They're super kind of trusted, and having this understandable methodology that teams will have seen kind of across different investments is just a helpful way to engage in this dialogue and really help present your requests in ways that speak to things that the C-suite will care about. Just to give you a little bit of background as well on what exactly does the process look like when Forrester creates one of these studies. This is just a really high level overview, but they start by doing some due diligence. So this is where they speak with Poppulo experts, as well as the Forrester research analysts who are involved in covering the solution space. And this is where they kind of unpack some of the key solution criteria and key benefits areas to better understand the space and make sure the research analyst has that perspective as well. And the next step are customer interviews. So Poppulo had introduced Forrester to 4 of our customers, and they were interviewed independently by Forrester. No one from Poppulo was in the room. And these interviews really form the basis of the study. Forrester then takes this information, they synthesize it into a composite organization, and that's to make, to be able to produce that standardized number set on the other end. And they produce these results with their financial model framework that's built again off of insights from those customer interviews. And then finally, Forrester writes the case study, and they maintain editorial control over that. So it's really, Poppulo did make these introductions, but Forrester maintains a lot of control, autonomy, and they're very independent in how they approach these assessments. So getting into the customers that were interviewed for this study. So as I mentioned, Forrester's process included interviews with internal comms leaders from 4 Poppulo customers. And these customers represented a variety of industries. So we did look at folks in healthcare, marketing and advertising company, technology, and packaging. They were all global enterprises with over 100,000 employees. And we chose, based on the guidance of Forrester, organizations that were around a similar size to aid in the consistency of analysis. However, you're able to take this financial model and apply it to organizations of really any size or industry. And we have actually developed a simple online calculator you can use to sort of plug in your cost savings. They are based on the number of employees within your organization. So you should see that within the resources kind of section at the bottom of your window as well. You can kind of test that out. You can also look at the study itself and sort of plug in the numbers as you know them to get a more custom analysis. So as I mentioned, these interviews form the basis of Forrester's financial model framework. And as part of this modeling, what they do again is synthesize customers into a representative composite organization. So you'll see the characteristics that came out of that composite on the right. So sort of the representative organization that these numbers are based on included an annual revenue of $40 billion, a workforce of 110,000 employees, 110 users of the actual Poppulo software, and a pre-Poppulo reach of just under a third of their workforce. So kind of an open rate around 31%. So let's get into what did the before state look like? I think this is really helpful to understanding, why did customers seek out Poppulo in the first place? What were the things that they were feeling and experiencing and seeing that really made it clear that it was time to look for new technology? So prior to Poppulo, these organizations all primarily relied on disparate tools for internal communications. They were sort of using a mixture of things, which resulted in quite a few challenges. One of the big ones was limited targeting capabilities. So these resulted in really generic messages that they felt diluted the impact of what they could potentially offer their organization. In fact, you'll see the quote there on the right from the participant from the healthcare organization who said that before Poppulo, they just released that one version of employee news, which didn't really satisfy anybody. It didn't make the internal comms team feel great, and it was generic, so it didn't quite land with their employees either. As a result of those kind of collection of communications tools, things were really inefficient, and they used a lot of manual processes when it came to actually creating communications. So that wasted a lot of time. It created operational delays, sort of just dragged down the speed of their program. Another finding was that messaging consistency was a challenge. So messaging across channels and teams, which the interviews said made, even created some employee confusion when messages weren't consistent. Sometimes it created even reputational damage for the comms teams to not be having a consistent through line there. And then an inability to scale was also keenly felt. This was particularly apparent during periods of rapid growth or change, such as M&A. And a lack of metrics was another big challenge. So this made it difficult, of course, for them to optimize their content and delivery because they were flying without really knowing what was landing and what wasn't. And then finally, they were spending significant time on really basic tasks. So things like email creation, even IT interventions with things like distribution lists, rather than focusing on more impactful or strategic work. So Christy, you speak with a lot of our current and prospective customers to understand and provide recommendations on how to improve their processes. Are there any examples of these things that you could share to help illustrate these challenges and bring them to life a bit?
Well, thanks, Heather, for asking. And I absolutely agree that these are really the top of the list challenges that we see across all industries. I think a particular thing of note here is the minimal data-driven decision-making point. Of really working without data to guide your decisions and to support your actions. It makes communication much more of a guessing game than anything strategic. It's really, really hard to be successful when you're working in the dark. So, that lack of data, it greatly also really greatly limits the ability of communicators to tell the story of success to their leadership. And that's something that's really important in, looking at things like expanding the team and helping justify what communications does and helping shift the opinion that people have of communications, that it is more of a cost center rather than a value driver. And communications drives an incredible amount of value. I've had conversations with customers who have told me that they don't really have a way, or there just isn't a way to quantify the impact of communication. And that's keeping them from being able to do things like justify the growth of the comms team, or successfully request a budget for a project, like we're talking about here. So, of course, while it's more difficult to do that without data, it's still possible, but having good data makes a huge, tremendous world of difference in helping anyone to actually be able to put outcomes and numbers, and really be able to discuss with their leadership, here's what communications is doing, here is why it matters, and here's the value that it brings.
Yeah, I think that is such a great point, and that, if you're not able to really prove things out with data, a lot of times things get run off of people's impressions and opinions, which might be no one's reading the content, or, it's not reaching XYZ audience, when sometimes, that's not the case. And you can prove that out with data and actually show how it's connecting to, results across programs. But if you don't have that ability to do that reporting, then it is quite difficult. Of course, you can do things like surveys and try to come across the impact in other ways, but yeah, really key to be able to show the results there.
When you get to the point where, where people are requesting budget and actually looking at financial numbers, you can have all of the impressions that you want, but having actual data, that's really going to make a difference when you're having these discussions about understanding what communications does and how it does impact, especially if you're looking at a larger change management or, really digital transformation initiative within a company. Communications is a really key part of that, but sometimes is overlooked. So I think being able to provide that data and build the reputation of the comms department is something that's really helpful in larger scale change across the organization. Is going to be helpful for people.
Absolutely. I think that kind of segues us nicely to some of the investment objectives. So these are the things that customers really looked for to help solve these challenges. So they, of course, looked for a solution back to kind of mirroring the exact challenges, things that would allow them to target and personalize better, make their processes more efficient, more of that centralized communications, creation and publishing flow. And of course, as we've been discussing, the ability to have that reporting and analytics needed to improve their communications programs and prove out their value. Some other factors that we haven't touched on yet that came up as kind of key things that our customers were looking for as they evaluated platforms included multilingual support, so the ability to reach their global workforces really in their preferred language of employees. And this is a key requirement that we see with many of the global organizations that Poppulo works with. And they also were looking for a solution, of course, that's user-friendly, would integrate well with their existing systems and sort of not require like a ginormous lift to get people up and going and ongoing training, something that would be user-friendly and people could pick up quickly. And just kind of to, on that multilingual piece for a moment, I think this is something, Christy, I'm sure from your side as well, you can speak to this, but we're really seeing a renewed interest in this area in distributing communications in multiple languages, and sort of been a fascinating trend to watch. And I think part of it is definitely being driven by improvements in AI translations and sort of the ability to translate content at scale much faster and more affordably. So of course, Poppulo has built this capability directly into our platform, but it's been interesting to see, when we first released this functionality, I was thinking it would just be a way for organizations that were already doing these translations today to do them more efficiently. But what we're seeing on top of that, of course, that's happening as well, is that organizations are actually looking at it as a way to make their organizations more inclusive and start offering translations where they didn't in the past. They were just limiting things to kind of single language communication. So it's really been fascinating from that inclusivity side and to think about it from that lens as well. Christy, what are your thoughts? I'm sure these criteria are very familiar to you as well.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think because, as you discussed earlier, Heather, Forrester used a composite company for this study, it makes perfect sense that these are the sorts of things that we would see. These are very common objectives that are very usual across all different industries, different companies of all different sizes. Everybody really wants to work more efficiently and effectively. And when you look at it, that's what this is all about. Going back to what I previously mentioned in terms of telling the communication, the story of communication success, better engagement, better analytics is a big part of this. But one thing that I think is is an extension of that is being able to tie improvements to business outcomes. That is something that is critically important when you need to speak the language of executives who really are focused on business outcomes. So really being able to quantify everything that you're doing and say, we did this thing. In the case that you mentioned, Heather, we now offer multilingual communication. That does lots of different things that do things like reduce risk. If you are offering multilingual communications about security compliance to people, they are more likely to engage with it and to understand it and to be able to take action on those things quickly because they have the information in a way that is most consumable for them. In a similar way, thinking about crisis communications and the ability to be able to communicate out really critical, important, time-sensitive information to people in the language that is most understandable for them in a really fast manner. You don't have to send it out to a person or to an AI agent or to a service to translate things. You can do it right there within the software, get it approved, send it out. Can be much more nimble, and you can really get ahead of lots of different things that are happening out there. One other common goal that I wanted to call out that I see is expanding reach to people who don't have or who just choose not to engage with email. There's a lot of different ways that people want to communicate, especially we work in a very multi-generational global world. So there's a lot of different preferences, and we all know that there's people out there who just don't check their email. And really looking at how we can reach them. It's challenging to do so, but reaching them by looking at things like additional channels, reaching them on Teams, SharePoint, mobile, digital signage, those sorts of things. It's a critical part of a communications plan that you can work on to really expand that reach and make sure that you are feeding to everybody who needs to get the information you have.
Yeah, absolutely. That is another key reason that folks come to Poppulo looking to expand that reach to more of their employee population for sure. So here's sort of the exciting numbers, the top level results that Forrester identified. And this is looking at the 3-year impact of what organizations are able to achieve with Poppulo. So what you'll see here, there's a significant ROI that organizations achieve, so 375%. And that payback period, so when they were able to cover the cost of their software investment, was actually within the first 6 months. So really strong and fast time to value from that perspective. The total benefits, and we'll get into kind of what numbers are behind the factors that added up to this benefit, but the total is 5.3 million, which yielded a net present value of 4.18 million. So this is factoring in the costs, so software costs and ongoing management costs for things like training, employee salaries, and benefits for those who are using Poppulo. So some really great results that our customers were experiencing and that came out of this study. And let's dive into kind of what's behind those numbers a little bit more. So Forrester identified 3 primary quantified benefit categories. So the first was employee time saved due to increased reach. So kind of as we were just chatting about, that ability to more effectively gain readership, gain engagement from more of your workforce. The second, increased productivity from content creation, time savings, and efficiencies. So this is really on the communicator side, their ability to, again, create that content much more efficiently. And the third, avoided hiring and training costs due to decreased turnovers. This one, we'll dive into each of these in a little bit more detail, but really an interesting one when you think about things like how the software helps to improve things like employee satisfaction, and it can actually make a difference on the retention front as well. So let's take a look at this first benefit, which is, again, that employee time savings component due to increased reach, which led to significant time savings for employees. That was worth $2.9 million over 3 years. And some of the things that interviewees shared, right? They shared that improved reach helped ensure that their employees received timely messages, more relevant information, and that reduced the need for follow-up communications and rework. So sort of employees were getting the right message faster without as much need to sort of mass communicate the same pieces, much more personalized approach there. They also found that it minimized the chances of miscommunication. So sort of the time sink of people feeling confused, needing clarification. They were able to kind of keep that messaging consistency again, and reduce chances of employees kind of misunderstanding what was meant through the internal comms. And you'll see kind of the numbers that some of which went into the calculation there. So organizations were able to double their open rates. So kind of the composite started around 31 and doubled their open rates to 62%. Of course, we I would say often see much higher open rates than that within our customers, but just looking at, these are very large organizations, and we do see these numbers vary quite a bit across industry as well, depending on your organizational makeup and all of that, and the types of workers that you have. But some of the factors that interviewees noted as going into this, factoring into why they think engagement had increased so dramatically. So things like creating a recognizable employer brand, so communications that were very clearly from the organization. They were personalized to each employee, so they included much more relevant information, which makes people much more interested in reading your communications over time, because they know that they will receive something valuable when they do so. And even things like the ability to customize who the message gets sent from. So things like, using the ghostwriting, using the alias of the CEO or the business unit leader, delivering things from that perspective, instead of having maybe a generic, internal comms message box where people are less inclined to necessarily open those emails or other forms of communication. And one thing that the VP of Employee Experience and Internal Comms at the packaging company noted was that their engagement scores actually grew 13 percentage points. And this was just between 2 surveys when they really started using Poppulo. So really powerful results there. Christy, what are your kind of impressions, thoughts around this area?
So Heather, I think one of the things that you said really stuck with me is really reducing the amount of content, but increasing the relevancy of content for people. If you can do that, and you can begin to help everybody understand that every email you get is going to be useful, going to be personalized for you, it's going to be relevant. People, as you said, Heather, are going to be much more interested in opening your email, engaging with your content. And that engagement piece is really kind of a golden ticket to all kinds of things. When people are engaged with the communications that they're getting, they become more engaged with their job in general, with the people around them, and with their role. When they're excited about what they're doing, they're going to do it better. They're going to do it faster. They're going to do it more successfully, and people are going to be happier at work. And all of those things are critically important in a communication strategy, and also in just making sure that your employees are as effective and as happy at work as they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen, of course, many transformative results. And a large part of it is due to that personalization and, that hyper targeting. Like I'm not in the US getting comms meant for, the UK office has donuts today, as much as I would, love to travel over there and receive them. It just cuts down on that noise, right? We're also busy these days, and really focusing in on what matters is so valuable for that, saving all of that precious time.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look at really the second benefit here, which focused on how Poppulo improves productivity for communicators. So those creating and managing communications, whether in internal comms or other folks who are using the system as well. And these efficiencies resulted in time savings worth $1.9 million. So some of the things that interviewees noted that Poppulo software really helped them with was to be more efficient due to features like templating, automate a lot of automation in the platform, of course, saves time, the ability to collaborate better across individuals and teams. And as a result, they were able to achieve more without requiring more resources. So that was really beneficial there. And then I think, the numbers, the financials are really great and important, but I actually love to look at this one through hours saved. I think it just makes it so tangible and real to think about, what could I do with this much time back in my day? So if you look at this benefit from where the hours view, that is 32 working days per communicator saved each year. And that's 6.5 working weeks. Like imagine what you could do with that kind of time freed up. And a lot of that time spent on the manual things, like the not so fun parts of the job, I think that most people would consider like tedious. So, I think this is an amazing benefit. Christy, I know I'm sure talked a lot about time savings. What are some of the things you hear in that area from our customers?
Well, I think, Heather, you hit the nail right on the head there with thinking about the administrative stuff. Like no communicator has ever applied for a job thinking that they're going to struggle with distribution lists or use pivot tables in Excel to understand reporting. Like nobody in I have no communicator ever that I've met has wanted to do that. So really being able to take that work off of their plate with automation, with really robust reporting, those sorts of things that you get within Poppulo, and being able to refocus that time to strategic communication tasks. So really, that helps your communicators do what they want to do and do what they're focused on, which is engaging with communication, writing, and really working with people and communicating rather than doing things like arguing with Excel pivot tables. It really helps them to be more effective in their work. And it also helps them provide better, more strategic communications because you have those 32 working days a year that can go towards more strategic things. So it's really, really impactful, both with communicator happiness and actually being able to do their work more effectively. As I mentioned earlier, if you're engaged with what you are doing, you are going to do it better and faster, and that extends to communicators too. So you can, again, redirect a lot of time to something that's more useful for the communications team as a whole in strategic objectives.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely agree. That, I think this is just showing how it really helps keep communicators, focused hopefully on what they, signed up for in the first place, right? Why they got into this line of work. And the reason that organizations have this function, right, is to make that impact, and it's not to do there's so many little things that, need to happen to do things like that effective targeting and personalization, that by letting the software take care of it, you get that one, there's like so much fewer opportunities for human error when it's just kind of managed automatically and automated in that way. Yeah, also on the satisfaction front, that transitions us nicely into the last benefit, quantified benefit, I should say, that Forrester found, which was actually decreased turnover. And this was specifically looking at internal communicators, actually. This was due to improved employee engagement and satisfaction while working with Poppulo's platform. So communicators, our interviewees said that employees felt more informed and valued, which made them less likely to leave the organization, and that reduced costs associated with hiring and training new employees, which Forrester, sort of based on their knowledge and communicator salaries that they got from these organizations, they estimate at a 40K per hire average cost to hire. So not only were these organizations able to do more without needing additional resource, but their staff was also more satisfied in the process. And I think that's really important. It's not just about doing more, but it's also about, doing it better, feeling better about it. So I think, a lot of what we were just chatting about as well, but Christy, kind of how else does this strike you from the retention perspective?
So I think retention is incredibly important. Again, that's a big business outcome that a lot of executives look at, because if you have high retention, that is in a little bit more of an unstable workforce. So that drives risk for the organization. If you can keep people in their roles and provide them with a career ahead of them, provide them with a tool set that's not causing them to do things, unpleasant things that they don't want to do as part of their day, you are going to keep those people in seat. And that really drives things like institutional knowledge, and really being able to create a set of communicators that have history at the company, that are going to be able to speak to those nuances that maybe are unwritten, but they have the history of, here's what happened here 5 years ago that, we should take into context for people who have been working here for a while. And that's something that's a little bit more difficult to quantify, but putting that into the bucket of just making sure that you keep those people there in the long term is a really important piece of this as well. And then again, just making sure that people are happy by taking those, ridiculous pivot tables off their plate is something that's going to make everyone want to stay a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is that even beyond the cost to recruit and interview and onboard an employee, that knowledge and historical perspective is so valuable. And again, it's not really factored in here, because how do you exactly go about quantifying that? But definitely something that I'm sure everyone has felt, right, throughout their career. So very relatable from that perspective. And I think, that those three were really the quantified benefits that Forrester identified. So the things that are associated with those hard savings numbers. But as we've been chatting about, right, not all benefits are really easily or consistently measured. The Forrester researcher I spoke with while working on this project sort of described this as like maybe things you might need to do some sort of like specialized like research, you might need to like establish some like big piece of almost like psychology research, like study your employees to try to quantify some of these things. But we don't need to do that, right? Because that's kind of, we know that these things are still very valuable, and that there are many benefits that organizations can achieve that are felt are really important, sometimes even more important than the quantified benefits, to depending on the organization. But that maybe you just can't measure in those quantified terms, which is totally fine. And some of the ones that we have been touching on, you'll see here as well, like things like improved communications quality. That's been a consistent theme. Consistency of messaging, we've talked about increasing that internal connection and employee engagement. Some of the few that we haven't touched on as much. So one is effective support and training. So I love this one, because what actually came out of the interviews is that our interviewees found a ton of value working with our actual support resources, our customer success organization at Poppulo, the training they received, they found a lot of value in that. So that came out of those interviews, which is great. Cultural inclusivity, we talked a little bit about that from the perspective of translations, but I think again, it came through on that note of personalization and having communications that were regionalized or localized, where it just felt like they received things that were in the perspective, even things like the holidays and things that are happening across different regions, making global organizations, which can be tough to unify from that cultural perspective, feel much more inclusive. Another unquantified benefit that we see a lot is efficient crisis communication. So this is a big one where, sometimes things are very urgent, and reaching all your employees and knowing that you can get the biggest reach and engagement is really critical during those moments of crisis. So that's another key benefit that organizations found they really valued Poppulo for. And then on the communicator front, enhanced professional development. So this is an interesting one where, again, because of the reduction in those manual tasks, that sort of those things that are less valuable, but really like time intensive a lot of the time. By removing a lot of that work, they were able to focus more on professional development. So not only were they, already able to focus on the kind of the core value driving components of their role, but they actually had found that time to upskill and continue to develop, which is amazing. And then again, that better work-life balance, the less time poured into those manual those manual components as well. So, Chrissy, let's just talk about, I know you see a lot of these as well. What are some of the ones that strike you, or do you have any examples you've heard or seen recently that we could chat through here?
I think, picking up on the strong cultural inclusivity one for a moment, I think that you made some really good points there, Heather, about making sure that you're reaching people, hitting, the right dates and that sort of thing. And I think that's in a really important piece in making sure that everyone feels like they are part of the same organization. There is, and I've heard from a number of global organizations that they are very focused on where the headquarters happens to be. So, the particular example I'm thinking of is a Canadian company, and all of the people who were working in the Asia Pacific region were saying how all of the communications are so Canadian focused. And being able to really have contributors that are local who can contribute to your communications, that can focus on the departments or the areas that are in there and provide that very cultural specific content. But also one of the things that we worked on with them is being able to say, here's they had an office in Hong Kong. So here's a Hong Kong feature. There's a cultural festival or a holiday taking place. Here's what the people in that office are doing and who they are, and really being able to create those ties across cultures across the company is something that's important in just helping everybody feel like they're part of a larger whole, but also just really great in terms of understanding your coworkers and seeing each other as people rather than, just someone who you don't know. And those sorts of things, again, it's very easily facilitated within the software with all of the different things that we've got going on to help with contribution and collaborative working, but also really helpful in driving that vision of a whole company, which sometimes is really hard to achieve. And I think that's a key point that I've worked with on a number of global companies that I think is worth mentioning here. It's just helping create a whole company that is respectful of everybody and doesn't do things like sends out a very important communication on a day that happens to be a holiday in one part of the world. So, being sensitive to those things is much easier when you're working from a centralized space.
Yeah, I think absolutely those are really great examples that speak to, from the global perspective, how these things play out. And you're so right, like just those little things where, when they aren't accounted for can be really keenly felt. And it's like, oh, I don't belong. It's all about that sense of feeling like you belong at the company as well, and that you're, recognized from your vantage point, I suppose. I'm sure you have lots of stories of this as well, Christy, but probably other angle to think about there from an inclusivity perspective, sort of a different side of the cultural. You mentioned that a lot of organizations tend to keep focus on that sort of that headquarters kind of mentality. But another element that we see is that cultural divide that often exists between the front line and, the knowledge workers for organizations that do have some of that mix. There's definitely on the front line, some of that reach, why it's so hard to really reach and meaningfully engage that population is that if you're just sharing the messages that are kind of those corporate messages, it creates like an us versus them culture, versus if you're able to inject, as we've been talking about, that local messaging, sometimes even translations do factor in here. But that personalized touch as well with the things that they care about, that are really relevant and tailored to their roles, again, creates that one organization feeling, and sort of less like there are, different types of organization, like almost micro organizations, right, happening because of the differences in role and employee experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that example is a really good one. I remember a specific conversation that I had with a company that did have a very large disconnected manufacturing population. And really one of the quotes that I remember is saying, we don't really need to hear about all those office people. We would like to hear more about us. And, I think that's a very key part is really, your manufacturing population or your production population, if you have one of those, is a very important part of your business success. And having that work base also remain stable and have longevity. And, again, the engagement and the retention and the productivity of those teams, critically important to business success. And to your point, Heather, they can be a little bit difficult to reach, but you need to give those people a reason to stay and not, go down the street to another place that has a similar role and pays them a little bit more. So really creating that environment where people feel recognized, and rather than seeing, the VP of something has been here for 5 years, congratulations, but the head of this particular production line has been here for 5 years, congratulations. That makes such a difference when you're looking at trying to reach people with information, again, that matters to them, that is relevant and personalized. And people don't have that connection to others who work in a different factory that they've never met or work in an office that they've never met. They want to know about the people they see every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It builds that credibility as well to keep engaging with communication when it will be, when you feel like it truly recognizes you for you. And also critically, again, from the communicator perspective, the ability to do that in scale and to enable that personalization, because of course you have to recognize that doing that kind of manually without the support of a system like Poppulo can be like that's the barrier, right, to getting it done. So I'm going to move us on because we have some more content, but we can always come back to this discussion, but I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A as well at the end here. So looking at, and Christy, would love your advice to communicators, because this is like your bread and butter, but how to actually, take these findings and apply them to your own organization. And really how do you think about, use numbers like this, customize it to your case. So some of the ways that you can use the study, right? Of course, using these numbers to help build a strong business case to align with those executive priorities around cost, around efficiency, around engaging a wider part of your workforce, the ability to accelerate that decision making. So maybe it's, sort of remove some of those barriers or questions of, is this really going to deliver, for us? What is this? Can't you just, use Outlook, right? Support. Sorry if that triggered anybody. Support long-term planning decisions. So again, because this is a 3-year horizon view, you can kind of think about, that those steps and the things that you might be able to achieve throughout a multi-year program, right? And then enabling that cross-functional buy-in, getting, speaking that language of the C-suite, right? To not just, say that, well, this will make it nicer for us, but really to show what that means in terms of the cost savings component. And also get inspired to measure the impact of Poppulo yourself, whether you're an existing customer, whether you're interested in Poppulo, having some language and things to think about when you're quantifying the results of your own program. And if you are interested and eager to get your hands on this report, you can download a copy at poppulo.com in our resources section. But again, we'll also be sending everyone who registered their own copy of the report as well. So you can wait for that email, or you can go download it today. It's there for you. There's definitely a lot of the financial model components that we couldn't go into in exhaustive depth here. So take a look at that study as well. But yeah, Christy, as I said, would love to hear from you on this topic. How do you coach, how do you work with communicators to kind of build these business cases?
So thanks, Heather. As you mentioned, this is the bread and butter of what I do, on a day-to-day basis, is really work with our prospects and customers to help them help them build that strong business case to do to be honest, the math and numbers part that, aren't generally communicators' forte, and really help people to say, here's how you can take what you would like to do, tie that to a business impact, tie that to some actual numbers, because when you're going to an executive, you need to be able to present a very crisp, short, impactful presentation And often executives have a big focus on numbers and outcomes. So being able to read the room, know who you're speaking to, know what those business goals are so that you can tie your desires to the impacts that they'll have to the goals of the larger organization. And I think that that's where something like these total economic impact studies really come in handy. It helps you to change. Oh, it would be really nice if we could not have to work with distribution lists anymore, that we could make adjustments without calling IT. That is something that is very functional, that is very real in the day-to-day of people who are using the software, but that is not something that's terribly impactful for executives or director level people who are thinking more strategically and more based on outcomes. So how to take that need and translate it into something that's going to build this strong business case, then put some numbers to that is, again, what I am here to do, and really thinking about making that transition is what's going to help people to be most effective in building a business case that's going to have the desired impact and get the yes and get the budget approval.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're here to help with that. We do have a quick poll. So if you would be interested, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today and maybe you're looking for some additional support there, we'd be happy to get in touch with you to help you build a custom analysis and a custom business case to calculate the ROI of Poppulo for your business. So if you're interested in having that conversation, let us know. Okay, and just to end before we get to some Q&A, as I mentioned, unfortunately, Lewis O'Neill from WPP was unable to join us today, again, due to some unforeseen circumstances, but I chatted a bit with Lewis leading up to this webinar, and he has such a great story about the impact they've been able to deliver at WPP that I didn't want to, felt like you still deserve to hear it anyway. So wanted to share some of that story with you. And you actually can read a little bit about it on our website. So Lewis was actually a recent recipient of a Poppulo Impact Award, and this is a award program that recognizes outstanding achievements. So those that drive significant measurable improvements in internal communications. We were delighted to offer Lewis this award and recognize him and the team for their work. So Lewis is a leader within the enterprise technology communications team at WPP. If you're not familiar with WPP, they are a multinational communications, advertising, and PR company, and they have a global workforce of more than 100,000 employees. Prior to Poppulo, this was sort of their experience. They struggled with things like fragmented communication systems, multiple tools, that they really struggled with the efficiency side from that perspective. And then just being within that IT comms team, one of the pieces they were really looking to improve was they were having difficulties sourcing meaningful and sort of the volume of employee feedback they were looking for on IT services. They were sort of, they knew that they wanted that employee feedback to really make an impact on their experience, but they weren't getting the kind of input they needed from employees there. However, they deployed Poppulo in 2022, which really allowed them to create modern looking, personalized communication so much more easily. And that ultimately resulted in a doubling of their open rate. So really great success there from the reach perspective. They also found that their feedback survey responses have dramatically increased. Things like the emails not going to spam, emails not looking like they're coming from a weird third-party system, but actually, appearing as official company communications has helped increase the response rate and has given their IT group a lot of valuable information on how they can actually improve their services to improve the employee experience there and ultimately make sure that IT is delivering on the objectives and the value they can offer the organization. And then from the time savings component, this is super impressive. They're saving 15 hours a week per communicator, and that's thanks to more efficient content creation and distribution, which is really an incredible result. And because of these successes that they've seen over the years, they've expanded the use of Poppulo to teams like HR, transformation, and change programs to help make those style of communications more efficient and effective as well. So really wanted to shout out Lewis there for the great work that he's done at WPP. And even though he wasn't able to join us today, a really great story and example of how customers are seeing value with Poppulo. All right, so we have a couple more minutes here. I'm going to take my slides down so I can see the Q&A. Is there anything, Christy, you see that'd be good for us to address?
I'm just looking through here. So here's one that says, how does industry sector factor into potential value? And that is something that I can certainly discuss, Heather, if you would like.
This again, we can dialogue here, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this topic.
Yeah. So I think industry sector is incredibly important. As I mentioned earlier, the things that we were looking at in this total economic impact study, they're very focused on, because it's a composite organization, all the different kinds of things that people are interested in seeing. But industry sector is a really important piece of the puzzle. If we look at things like the differences between a corporation and the difference between that and a manufacturing organization or someone who provides professional in-home services, those are very, very different audiences, and they have very, very different needs for communication and information. So if you're looking at someone who is a field services person who is going to someone's home and providing a service, whether it be lawn care or fixing their dryer or anything of that sort, they are probably working from a phone or a tablet, not really connected to email all the time. So the personalization and the targeting pieces of that are incredibly important. What you don't want is that person to open their email and get 50 emails and be overwhelmed and just decide to ignore them all. So being able to very specifically target people, being able to perhaps use a different channel to reach them with critical communications, all of those sorts of things are pieces that factor into a much broader business case discussion that we were just talking about, is taking the high level things and really dialing them in based on your specific industry needs, the pain points that you as a specific organization are experiencing, and how we can put tools in place to improve those things that then again drives better business outcomes for everybody. So long way of saying the very short answer is yes, industry is critically important there. And it is something that as we begin to dial into these, again, more specific discussions, we can really work on focusing on what is specific to an industry to make sure that we're having the biggest impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's what's great about the findings that we've shared today is that they do apply right across any industry. But as you were, mentioning there, Christy, it's really, there's a lot of opportunity as well to think about the key objectives, the strategy within your own organization. And so much of that has to do with the type of industry you're in as well. So that can make it really big. Again, tying those results to the things that matter there is really critical, which I think actually relates to another question that I see here, which is around how to really speak the language of the C-suite when it comes to additional examples. And I think one that I have top of mind to share here is around the power of really communications for driving strategy and change. We have a lot of great data here that shows that more effective communications are really the key driver of success and across these types of initiatives. And I think that sharing that narrative with your C-suite and really highlighting how communications contributes, of course, like the cultural side and the engagement side, but, the things that they really want to achieve, that success really hinges a lot on communication. So making that point and connecting it back to the impact you can make on those specific initiatives is also an incredibly powerful way to build your business case.
Absolutely agree. And I think that, the change management piece of it, Heather, that you mentioned is critically important is, you can communicate the why behind the change to everybody and set expectations and help them understand why this is going to benefit them. That's not what C-suite is concerned about. C-suite is concerned about the business outcomes that come from that. So as we've said this a few times before, is tying one to the other is what's really going to help you speak the language of the people who are able to approve budget or sign a purchase order to be able to make a purchase for these sorts of things. So being able to make that translation while still keeping in mind the original outcomes that are important for the people doing the work every day. That's an important connection to make and keep track of what both sides really.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that fantastic point, we are at time for today. An hour really flew by here, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today, participating in this discussion. We hope you found it interesting and valuable. And again, we'll be reaching out to you with a copy of the study so you can read it all for yourself as well on your own time. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.